Russian President Vladimir Putin shut down recent New York Times reporting alleging that an unnamed pro-Ukraine group is responsible for last year's Nord Stream explosions as complete nonsense. That's what Vladimir Putin had to say. Quote, an explosion of this kind, of this power, at this depth, can only be carried out by specialists and supported by the full power of the state, which has certain technologies, said Putin. He added, quote, one should always look for those who are interested and who is interested. Theoretically, of course, the United States is interested.
Moreover, in an interview with Russian media this week, one of Putin's top allies accused Western media of planting the Times story in order to, quote, cover up the true people behind the crime. So let's start with this conversation about motive, because from the beginning, to me, absent any other evidence, the question of who had the incentive to do this was obscured immediately by the American press, I gotta say. Immediately there was a rush to attribute this attack to Russia when Russia is the least likely person to want to do this. Its leverage over Europe, providing so much of the European energy supply, natural gas supply, was exactly why it wanted the pipeline. It stood to benefit from the pipeline. Germany had spent $11 billion on this pipeline, and the idea that this mutually beneficial pipeline would be destroyed when, one, they've invested in it, and two, either side has the ability to just turn it off. Germany can stop accepting it, as they had done in the month leading up to the invasion, and Russia had the ability to say, I'm not giving you my gas, right? So there's no need to destroy critical infrastructure that they both paid for. So that's first off the bat. And of course, later reporting, I think, was basically forced to exonerate Russia because you just couldn't land that plane. Now, from the U.S. perspective, some of the Western media has said, well, it's not fair to take these sound bites from Joe Biden and other officials, right, who say, like, we're going to do this. We have ways to do this.
But why is it not fair? Why is it not fair? When U.S. officials are confessing, believe them.
It's a clear statement of motive. At the very least, it's obvious what the U.S.'s motives are because they have advertised their motives this entire time. Now, to the question of capacity, I think this is where Cy Hirsch's reporting really comes in. Because whether or not you agree with the plan as he's described it according to his source, there are details in his reporting that do raise questions about who in the entire planet has the capacity to carry out an attack like this. A deep sea diving exploration that requires the sophisticated handling of a large quantity of explosives and the ability to maneuver in very populated waters at a time when there was this regular like sea exercises happening in the area. And again, the answer to that is the West or some Western aligned country who could, under the cover of that event, place these explosives.
The entity with the greatest motive to do this is actually not even the United States, but Ukraine itself. It is not some splinter group.
Sure.
That how would they have access? And I take Putin's point on that. How would a non-state actor, it was quickly decided this would be a state actor. Then when state actor pointed to U.S. or Ukraine, then we started saying, well, maybe it was a non-state actor.
Right.
Maybe it was someone sympathetic to Ukraine.
Right,
Ukraine.
Because the problem is the implication if it's a state actor, and if that state actor is Ukraine, even if it's not us, is that we, as someone who are executing a proxy war through Ukraine, are still culpable and if
we're not culpable, that raises its own questions. Let's say Ukraine did it. Let's say the Ukrainian government signed off on this. Ukraine is the actor with a lot at stake. Their country's being invaded. They're the most likely to kind of say, well, whatever about norms, we're being invaded. We don't have the luxury of not doing things like that. Do they tell Biden? Does Biden know? And if he doesn't know, does some other aspect of our foreign policy apparatus know, but not our president, which is a huge scandal if it's the case.
Well, that's the thing. I'm just going to say, even if we're not culpable, that we would probably have knowledge of it, have tacitly endorsed it. And by the way, is a violation of international law. Again, this is critical. There are rules against destroying critical infrastructure, German critical infrastructure, our allies' critical infrastructure. This isn't, complaining about Ukraine bombing something in Russia. This is a German pipeline, and the problem is that we have been upset with Germany for a long time because of its reliance on Russian oil and how that weakens our ability to coerce Germany to go along with whatever our foreign policy goals are, even if those aren't the goals that inure to the benefit of the German people who were faced with high gas and energy bills all winter as a consequence of our military interventionism, or our, well, I wouldn't say our, obviously it's Russia's military interventionism, but our choice to lend a hand to a country that is not explicitly treaty bound to us in any kind of way.
Well, now commentator and comedian Russell Brand has weighed in on the Nord Stream mystery. Let's hear what he has to say.
Nord Stream pipeline, which, you know, was blown up mysteriously. Guess what's happened? Since it's been blown up, the US has done a load of gas deals with European nations. Wow, what an extraordinary coincidence. The US is set to double its gas exports to the UK under plans to clamp down on rising living costs by weaning Britain of Russian energy. That was always the intention, to just take over gas exports from Russia. Why take my word for it?
You simply want to change the structure of energy dependence.
You want to change that structure by blowing it up.
For years, we've tried to get the Europeans to be interested in different pipeline routes. It's time to do that. You want to depend more on the North American energy platform, have pipelines that don't go through Ukraine and Russia.
But there is a pipeline going through Ukraine and Russia. Not anymore, there isn't.
If Russia invades, there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that?
I promise you we'll be able to do it.
So, nothing to worry about here then.
Yeah, again, all of these statements do raise the possibility. You can't say, no, there's no way the U.S. would do that. You just can't, based on all of those statements that suggest we would do something akin to this.
Also, speaking of alternative energy, lo and behold, Joe Biden announces this week that he's opened the historically large drilling project in the Arctic. At a certain point, all the arrows start to point in a single direction. Condoleezza Rice says we need more dependence on North American oil, and here we go, doubling down on investments in North American oil, even though it is a stark betrayal of Biden's explicit campaign promises not to do any more oil drilling.
Caribou don't get a vote. Sorry.
And apparently also the regular Americans, the people of Alaska, the Inuit populations that are going to be subject to the environmental harms very similar to those happening in East Palestine. Contemporary harms, not like global warming style harms, but toxic air and water harms, you know, that are affecting too many Americans and giving too many people asthma and cancer and all these other kinds of things. This is real and this is now. And if you're asking yourself, why would Joe Biden take a political hit like that and do something like this, especially when the gains of that drilling are 10 years out, well after Biden is going to be out of office?
I think the drilling in Alaska is probably supported by a majority of Americans. It's probably a political win.
It's not a political win among the people who voted Joe Biden into office.
But they're going to vote for him anyway. He has to seem like a normie, moderate type person, get enough of those independent Republican type, but that's his strategy for re-election.
Well, in the absence of an alternative, people feel like they have to vote blue no matter who. That's why I think it's so important for anybody to throw their hat in the ring, including people like Marianne Williamson.
He's trying to peel off those couple Republican or moderate or swing voters who are like, ugh, I really don't like Donald Trump. What has Biden done? Okay, he allowed drilling in Alaska. Fine.
But this is important.
That's the whole strategy.
Unless Democratic voters, if they purport to care about things like this, unless they are willing to credibly withhold their vote for Joe Biden, you're right. He can do things like this with impunity. The question is, are Democrats going to do what Republicans have done in the past and simply stay home or vote for alternative candidates? And this is an important one. I recently talked to Ro Khanna on my podcast earlier this week about this and about why he and so many progressives have, I would argue, prematurely endorsed Joe Biden. He hasn't even announced his run yet. But people who are much more politically aligned with the policies of someone like Marianne Williamson are going out of their way, it seems, to say they're going to vote for Biden. You know, why haven't any of those people, in the face of Joe Biden's flagrant disrespect for fundamental popular progressive policies, offered a run of their own or challenge of their own? Why do we live in such a neutered political atmosphere that there is no off-ramp for Americans who are not happy with either of these kinds of choices? So we'll see if the voter behavior changes at all, but until it does, we won't see any political behavior change.
American democracy serving up such appealing choices like Trump and Clinton and Trump and Biden. Gotta love it. More Rising right after this.